Okay, welcome back to week 11, American Literature, a genre study of mystery fiction. Okay, so we're getting pretty close to the end of our semester. So please have your topic for your final research paper or project. Again, you do have the option of creating a project instead of doing a research paper. And we've given you a lot of kind of hints along the way. If you have a question, just fire me off an email. But you should have that pretty much decided at this point. Next week, we'll kind of do an overall review of the course. We've come a long way, so let's take a look back and see where we've been. So this week, I first wanted to start off by going over reading for last week, the Ransom of Red Chief by O. Henry. So I really liked this story. I found it very humorous and very funny. And we did touch base with O. Henry in our Lit 4 class with the story After 20 Years. And O. Henry doesn't disappoint. He has so many twists and turns in his stories and kind of unexpected endings, and he follows through with this story, The Ransom of Red Chief, as well, in a very humorous way. Okay, so there are a couple of cases we're going to talk about, but we're going to do a little bit of a left turn this week. And we're going to talk about a genre within mystery. However, this is nonfiction mysteries. And nonfiction mystery books cover a wide range of topics that address true events, often involving mysteries of history or science, religion, magic, the supernatural, or the afterlife. For example, there are many works of unsolved crimes, unexplainable disappearances of people or groups of people, strange sightings like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, UFOs, or mysterious places that seem to be haunted. Nonfiction mysteries are also a very popular genre for documentary and reality television programs, often focusing on mysteries that remain unsolved or unexplained. And we're going to talk about two criminal mysteries. One happened here in Boston. It's called the Heist at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And a true story about an art heist that has never been solved. Then we're going to talk about another crime, a skyjacking, called the D.B. Cooper mystery. D.B. Cooper is the fictional name of an American skyjacker, an event that took place over the northwestern part of America by an American. Then we're going to talk about not criminal, but a disappearance, a military group or squadron of airplanes that were sent out on a mission that never returned. And true story off the coast of Florida. And it's been dubbed Flight 19. So we're going to take a look at those today. And we'll start off with our first story, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft, on our next slide. Okay, let's review last week's reading. The Ransom of Red Chief is a short story by O. Henry, first published in July 1907, issue of the Saturday Evening Post. It follows two men who kidnap and demand a ransom from a wealthy Alabaman sons. Eventually, the men are driven crazy by the boy's spoiled and hyperactive behavior, and they pay the boy's father to take him back. The story and its main idea have become part of popular culture, with many children's television programs depicting versions of the story as one of their episodes. It has also been often used as a classic example of two ultimate comic ironies: the supposed hostage actually liking his abductors and enjoying being captured, and his captors getting their just desserts by having the tables turned on them and being compelled to pay to be rid of him. This is from litcharts.com, The Ransom of Red Chief. From the very beginning, the story invokes delusion and irony, as the setting is a flat town whose name is Summit, evoking mountain peaks. The crooks at the story's center condescend to the town people, assuming that they are backwards and incapable of thwarting the kidnapping scheme, reasoning that proves just as delusional as the town's name. Furthermore, Sam's use of the word philoprogenitiveness, meaning the love of one's children, shows his silliness and pretentiousness. Sam wants to appear serious and intelligent, but he just comes across as ridiculous. The logic of the kidnapping at first seems rational. For maximum impact, it seems effective to take the only child of a rich and important local citizen. However, the plan immediately goes awry when Johnny is not the well-mannered upper-class child they anticipated. The first aspect of their plan, bribing him with candy, immediately earns them physical violence, which is just what they deserve for their abhorrent actions. But it is also a surprising act of violence from someone who was meant to be their victim. This shows when Johnny hits Bill with a brick. Bill isn't violent to Johnny in turn. Instead, he grouses about how the trouble will cost his father extra money, a threat he doesn't even follow up on. This begins to suggest Bill's patience, even under duress. Furthermore, the description of Johnny struggling like a welterweight cinnamon bear cues readers to see the kidnapping as comical and bungled rather than sinister and frightening. Neither the kidnappers nor the kidnapped seems particularly frightened or cruel, that their plan cannot account for the complexity of reality, and that the locals are unpredictable. Instead of being afraid, upset, or even sullen, Kidnapped Johnny seems to be having a wonderful time. This is another example of the townspeople not behaving as Bill and Sam anticipated. Furthermore, Bill's patience is on display again here. Johnny clearly injured him, but Bill's generous explanation is that they are role-playing. Not only does this show that incorporating Bill into his fantasy life has given Johnny real power over this man, but it also literally reverses the terms of the kidnapping, foreshadowing further reversals to come. These purportedly dangerous criminals and kidnappers have taken on the role of camp counselors or even surrogate parents, which shows the extent to which the kidnapping is off the rails. Furthermore, Johnny's soliloquy is funny and touching, softening Johnny's previous violence. Clearly, Johnny is simply a young boy who is naive but curious about the world and is starved for someone to listen to him. This passage, particularly the moment in which Johnny begs not to go home, hints that his home life is so troubled that he would rather be kidnapped and living in a rustic cave than at home with his rich but cruel father, which intensifies the reader's sympathy for Johnny's plight and contextualizes his prior violent behavior. Bill and Sam making Johnny sleep between them is an ambiguous gesture. While it seems restrictive at first, they claim that they are not afraid he would escape, so this seems to have an aspect of protective tenderness as well. In any case, Johnny's refusal to be tamed continues with fantasy play late into the night, leading Sam to have a bad dream about a red-headed pirate, which is clearly a stand-in for the red-headed Johnny, who has already gained tremendous power over his captors in real life. When Bill awakens to being scalped in the morning, Sam describes Bill's screams as unmanly, thus reserving his harshest criticism for his friend rather than his young attacker. As Johnny's primary playmate, Bill has taken the brunt of his abuse, while Sam has been executive of their ransom enterprise. Now, with dawn of the first day following the kidnapping, Sam is also a bit nervous about what Johnny might do to him in his sleep, and Bill jumps at the chance to call Sam out when he shows that he's not immune to Johnny's terrors. In this way, the two continue to bicker rather than focusing on the job at hand, which makes it difficult to address the unexpected question of who in their right mind would pay for the return of such a terrible child. Sam asserts, without any personal knowledge of course, that parents dote on rowdy kids. He has not yet grasped the depth of their problems, as he goes off to try to familiarize himself with an unfamiliar area. Sam's expectation that he would see pheasants with pitchforks looking for Johnny's contrast with the reality nobody seems to care. This is an indication that Sam does not understand the locals as well as he believes he does, casting doubt on the efficiency of their plan. Back in the cave, Bill asks Sam if he has a gun. No further mention of a weapon occurs in the story, and the fact that weapons have been absent from the story is important. Bumbling ineffectiveness is key to maintaining the reader's sympathy for these crooks, since being unarmed signals that they aren't a threat and gives evidence of how poorly prepared for mayhem these criminals truly are. The idea that Johnny is Bill and Sam's captive continues to erode as they realize they are the ones who need an exit plan, not Johnny. It's telling that Sam is uttering a sentence about the ransom letter, the key to their plans, just when Johnny knocks Bill over the fire with a slingshot in the style of little David overcoming the giant Goliath. The implication is clear that the tables have turned, and their plans continue to be eclipsed by Johnny's agenda. Since King Herod gave up Jesus for execution in the Bible, Bill's tongue-in-cheek comment underscores a struggle for authority in the story. Bill is suggesting that Johnny, a child who has being treated as special, really is dangerous and needs to be punished. An understandable perspective for one just clobbered with a rock. On the one hand, Johnny promises to behave, and in doing so makes clear he is not a rebel, but a member of their crew who didn't mean to hurt old Hank. Sam then encourages Johnny to apologize directly to his partner, calling him Mr. Bill, as a term of respect, as one might refer to a teacher. Bill and Sam may be newcomers to Summit, but Johnny shows his allegiance to them by apologizing. Being part of their crew is important to him, and he doesn't want to go home. It becomes clear that Bill and Sam are in over their heads with the ransom scheme, as they have yet to agree upon, let alone issue a demand. Sam calls the prospective ransom letter peremptory, demanding attention or obedience, which will turn out to be another case of wishful thinking, since the matter of payment is anything but settled. Meanwhile, Bill is not happy in his role as primary caretaker. The difficulties with Johnny that lead to the discounting of the ransom are evident in the two colorful words Bill uses to describe Johnny: skyrocket and a wildcat. Both are not so much insults as grudgingly respectful of Johnny's energy and power. Important factors here foreshadowing the ultimate reversal of fortunes. Although Bill and Sam's letter to Ebenezer conveys a reduced ransom demand, it still illuminates their lack of situational awareness. For instance, it claims that it is useless for skillful detectives to attempt to find him. Yet Sam has already observed that no one is looking for him. His elaborate investigation of the roads, crossings, wheat fields, and large trees don't make him a native of the area, just more deluded in thinking he is in control when dealing with old Dorset. The threat, "You'll never see your boy again," rings hollowest. These men clearly would never hurt Johnny, and it's not even clear that Johnny is missed. The assertion that these terms are final is simply untrue. As well, the signing off as desperate men is ironic, since it's not their aggression, but their weakness that is making them desperate. This is amply illustrated when Johnny, tired of playing Indian, calls for a game of Black Scout, a move that will prove particularly ominous and painful for Bill. Sam says the Black Scout game sounds harmless, when clearly this is the most humiliating and potentially damaging game Bill has yet suffered. If Sam seems to be more deluded of the two, Bill, the primary caregiver to Johnny and most abused. Yet Bill's patience is again in evidence after being kicked repeatedly as a play horse. He merely threatens to warm you good and continues the game. This is the kind of moment that builds sympathy for Bill, but there might be a limit reached for the reader. At what point does a person, particularly a grown man dealing with a child, just seem idiotic rather than sympathetic for putting up with abuse? In the first indication of things are actually going as planned for a change, Sam discovers that the local people have at least noticed and are concerned about Johnny's absence. So some increased confidence in their plan is warranted. Sam's pride is contrasted by Bill's situation as Johnny's horse, however, which he finds untenable and humiliating. Sam's inability to anticipate the seriousness of Bill's growing objections to their criminal endeavor could now be a big issue for their plan. Abuse by Johnny, ridden like a horse, bitten, kicked, black and blue, and forced to eat sand as if it were oats. Bill finally has snapped. He believes, sent Johnny home because he can no longer tolerate supernatural tortures. Pathetically, he describes in detail his reasons for sending this young boy home, something that did not, in fact, happen. So far, Bill has been aware of the acute reality of their challenges with Johnny than Sam has been. But here he takes a turn towards fantasy, believing that Johnny is gone when the boy is in fact right behind him. When Sam tells Bill to turn around to see Johnny is still there with them, it causes Bill to flop down on the ground and pluck at grass and sticks. This slapstick moment has significance in that usually Sam is deluded while Bill sees their situation all too clearly. But here Sam is literally telling Bill to open his eyes and look at what's in front of him. The result of pulling the wool from his eyes is a shock. Apparently, a full hour of withdrawal from the world. When he comes around, Sam is once again the deluded one, insisting that this scheme will go forward. Sam believes things are going well because he has sent a threatening letter and is receiving a reply. However, despite his assertions that his behavior resembles that of professional kidnappers, Sam actually seems to be participating in fantasy play similar to Johnny's after all. He is climbing trees and playing hide and seek with a half-grown boy who brings the response from Ebenezer. The crabbed hand with which the letter of response is written shows the age of the respondent, which might indicate that Ebenezer is weak. The substance of the letter will upend that implication. In his letter of response, Ebenezer turns the tables and suggests that it's Bill and Sam who should pay to end this debacle, not he. This reversal is a climax of the plot, establishing Ebenezer as the dominant actor, credibly threatening them in order to get what he wants. Amusingly, it is somewhat unclear if the neighbors would be angry with Sam and Bill for taking Johnny or bringing him back. In any case, his signature, very respectfully, is the sort of business-like formality that is a recognizable feature of otherwise cutthroat business communications. Sam's reaction to Ebenezer's letter is shock, of course, since to this point he has deluded himself that the kidnapping has a chance of succeeding. Sam and Bill's inability to make good on their threats to hurt Johnny is key to their coming acquiescence to Ebenezer's powerful response. In complying with Johnny's father's demands, they see the only way out of an improbably difficult situation, namely that they haven't the heart to hurt anyone, and they are terrified of both Johnny and his father. In fact, Johnny's father is such a strong figure in their minds that they use a lie about him buying Johnny a silver rifle and moccasins for bear hunting trip as bait to lure Johnny home. It's heartbreaking, highlighting as it does how sad and disappointing the child's life must have been with his father. In the final action, Johnny clings to Bill rather than to his father, and the father restrains his son while Bill and Sam make their getaway. It's a denouement that is both strangely sad and funny, illustrating that Johnny's home is no home, and that the strangers who came to town without a clue were leaving it considerably more knowledgeable about who runs things. Okay, so that's a quick analysis of our story. We'll move on to our next slide from here. Okay, we're going to take a little bit of a left turn here and talk about historic mysteries, which is part of the genre of mystery per se, but these are nonfiction stories, events that actually did happen, and they are, as of yet, unsolved. So our first story talks about a museum in Boston. It's called the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and it was a private museum owned by Isabella Stewart Gardner. And she was born in the mid-1800s. And her father was a very wealthy linen manufacturer. And she had all the privilege of money from that time, well educated, educated here in the United States, but also traveled throughout Europe as part of her further education. Now, as she traveled throughout Europe, she became fascinated by the great master works of art. And she had the money and the means, and she started to collect them. Well, after a time, she collected so much that she had a museum built right in Boston to display and house all of her famous art exhibits. So this is from an article called A Mystery for the Ages, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum Heist by Milton Estero. And it's from the artnewspaper.com. And this was written a couple of years ago. But the theft itself took place in 1990. So here we go. An empty frame remains where the storm on the Sea of Galilee was once displayed in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, courtesy of the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The walls of the office of Anthony Amore, the chief of security of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston since 2005, are covered with reproductions of all 13 works stolen in one of the biggest unsolved art thefts in history, when two men posing as police officers made off with the treasures painted by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Degas, and Manet on the 19th of March in 1990. At Amir's home, drawings by his daughter of Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, one of the works that was taken, hang on the door of his refrigerator. Quote, "I'm still wildly obsessed more than ever," he says. "I constantly think about those paintings." Jeffrey Kelly, the FBI's lead investigator on the theft since 2002, who works closely with Amore, considers himself equally obsessed. On the wall in his finished basement at home is a reproduction of The Storm of the Sea of Galilee that his wife gave him 3 years ago. Quote, "She frayed the edges of the painting had been sliced out of the frame," Kelly said. Despite more than 30,000 leads, hunches, forensic tests, psychic visions, jailhouse confessions, and hundreds of interviews with drug dealers, mobsters, retired police officers, journalists, museum directors, museum guards, and art dealers in the United States, Europe, Asia, and South America, authorities are still no closer to knowing the whereabouts of the works. Although the art has been estimated for some time to be worth $500 million, the skyrocketing art market has led some experts to raise the figure significantly. "It's at least $1 billion, says Otto Newman, a senior vice president of Sotheby's and a dealer in old masters for more than 30 years. The Vermeer alone, called The Concert, is worth nearly $500 million. Johannes Vermeer, the Concert, painted 1663 to 66, was Isabella Stewart Gardner's first major art purchase. Experts estimate the missing masterpiece is worth nearly $500 million today. The theft was explored last year in a 10-part podcast called Last Seen, a joint project of radio station WBUR, a national public radio affiliate, and the Boston Globe, a local Boston newspaper, which tracked down one lead to Florida to no avail. There have never been any demands for ransom, but tips still come in almost every week. Quote, some callers have been pestering us in the FBI for years, one of them since 2013. Some are very strange, Amor says. Anthony, one man, recently insisted that JFK Jr. and his wife were the thieves and faked their deaths to commit the crime. There are two kinds of tips, Kelly says. There are people who have a theory on who is involved in the theft. We check it out. Sometimes it isn't easy because the suspect might be dead, or we will interview a suspect and he denies it, Kelly says. Investigators can only apply so much pressure to get information because the statute of limitations to prosecute the theft as a crime expired in March 1995. So suspects are told about the potential for immunity from other legal prosecution and the $10 million reward offered by the museum. Then there are the people who are convinced. They are very specific that they know where the art is. Among those investigated by Kelly and Amor is Robert Gentile, 82 years old, a former gangster mobster suspected of concealing secrets about the theft, who was released from prison last March after serving 4 years for 3 gun and drug cases. He insists that he knows nothing about the theft and that he was framed by the widow of a mob associate who said her husband gave Gentile 2 of the stolen works around the year 2000. Subsequently, the FBI searched Gentile's house in Manchester, Connecticut, 3 times in the last 3 decades, with dozens of agents, ground-penetrating radar, canine dog units. They found guns, drugs, gun silencers, $20,000 stuffed in a clock, police hats, badges, and a list of the stolen Gardner Museum work with possible black market prices. If Gentile told us everything he knows, we'd be further along in our recovery efforts, FBI Agent Kelly says. I believe that some of the paintings have changed hands several times over the years. It is also quite possible that some people have those paintings and don't know what they have, Kelly says. We are confident we know who committed the crime. We believe they don't still have the art. We don't know if the art is all together or was split up. Top investigators who have weighed in on the theft disagree about where the works are now held. William Whitman, the former head of the FBI's art crime team, says some of the paintings could have ended up in Corsica. In 2006, when Whitman was still with the FBI, he posed as an unscrupulous art dealer who had clients interested in buying the Gardner paintings. He met 2 thugs from Corsica who indicated that the Vermeer and one of the Rembrandts were held by a gang there. The operation turned up nothing in the end, Whitman says, because of bureaucratic difficulties and turf fighting. But an officer of the French National Police agreed with his theory. Why would the thieves steal a Napoleonic statue instead of another painting, Whitman said, referring to the gilded bronze eagle statue decoration that was stolen along with the master paintings. Why? Quote, because Napoleon was from Corsica. Charlie Hill, formerly of Scotland Yard Art and Antique Squad, disagrees. Although Napoleon was from Corsica, the paintings are in Ireland, behind a wall in West Dublin, rather than in the United States, behind a wall in South Philadelphia. He declined to elaborate, however. Kelly and Amor said they have no evidence that the paintings are in Corsica or Ireland. The FBI believes that in the years after the heist, some of the art was taken to Philadelphia, where it was offered for sale by those responsible for the theft. Amor has created an extensive database on his computer that lists every person that the investigators have contacted over the years. I enter every piece of information about every person of interest we've heard about, he says. I stopped counting, but there are at least 30,000 different pieces of information. Address, phone numbers, vehicle information, biographical data, places of employment. It helps us when I get a new phone call and saves a lot of time. Many visitors to the Gardner Museum spend time looking at the empty frames that held the stolen paintings and still hang on the walls empty. But not everyone is interested in seeing them. I've talked to people who used to come here as students. Amor says, but they haven't come back because to them the theft is so sad. Okay, so let's take a look at a video news story on this Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft. It's called 28 Years Since the Heist and Still No Dice. Okay, so I have been to that museum many, many times. It's an absolutely beautiful place. It has an inner courtyard that's open, beautiful plants and flowers and statues and walkways. Just an absolutely beautiful, beautiful place. Now, Isabella Stewart Gardner not only was very wealthy, but she was very much a very eccentric person. Of course, she was part of the high society and elite of Boston. And it was said that she would walk down the street, Boylston Street, with her pet lion on a leash. So just goes to show she's kind of a very eccentric person. Okay, so take a look at that video. Pretty much explains how everything was done. And it talks a little bit about some of the people of interest even today. And that crime has never been solved. Okay, that's it. And we'll move on to our next story from here. Okay, our next case is a really fascinating case. And it's dubbed the D.B. Cooper case. And this is from an article, D.B. Cooper, America's Only Unsolved Skyjacking by Lachlan McClellan. And this is from historiesmysteries.com, which is also a famous TV series. So on the night of November 24th, 1971, a man dubbed D.B. Cooper hijacked Northwest Orient Flight 305, heading from Portland to Seattle. Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. Very short flight. After getting his ransom money, he parachuted into the cold, windy night. Although the FBI devoted massive efforts to the Northwest hijacking, the mystery man evaded capture. Consequently, Cooper cemented his place in the chronicles of crime as a celebrated outlaw and the mastermind behind the only unsolved U.S. skyjacking. The distinguished man sat alone in seat 18C on the Boeing 727 when he ordered a bourbon and soda a few minutes before takeoff. As flight attendants later described him, he was a polite, chain-smoking, 40-ish gentleman. He stood about 5'10" to 6 feet tall, with a thin build. His outfit included sunglasses and a tailored business suit, complete with a tie clip, which gave him an air of professionalism. The man had purchased his ticket under the name Dan Cooper. When a newspaper later reported his name in error as D.B. Cooper, he acquired the moniker that's still in use today. Cooper handed a piece of paper to a flight attendant. Florence Schaffner had previously received messages like this asking her for a date. Consequently, she almost dismissed the note, but the passenger insisted that she read it. The note indicated that the man had a bomb and instructed her to sit next to him. He proceeded to open his black attaché suitcase, and she saw what appeared to be red cylinders, a battery, and some wires. To the flight attendant, it looked like a bomb. Cooper instructed Schaffner to write down on a new piece of paper everything he was about to say to her. With the message in hand, she walked to the cockpit of the plane, where she handed Captain William Scott a ransom note demanding $200,000, which would be over $1 million today, in cash and 4 parachutes. Scott immediately contacted Northwest Orient Airlines and reported the incident. The company agreed to meet the ransom stipulations and stated the money would be available once they landed in Seattle. Because Cooper demanded 4 parachutes, the authorities believed he would take hostages. Therefore, they did not tamper with the jump equipment. Upon landing in Seattle, Tacoma, the operations manager for Northwest Orient presented flight attendant Tina Mccoy with the $200,000 and parachutes. Once he had what he wanted, the mystery man allowed the 35 passengers and 2 flight attendants to deplane. After the airplane was refueled, D.P. Cooper told the pilots that they would be flying to Mexico City. However, the captain informed him that they wouldn't be able to make it on 1 tank of fuel. That's when they all agreed they would stop in Reno, Nevada. Once the cockpit crew understood where they were headed, it was time to depart Seattle. Cooper requested that the plane take off with its rear door open and stairwell lowered, but Northwest Orient indicated that it was too dangerous. Although Cooper seemed confident that it was safe, that was not a problem for him, and the plane took off for Reno with the stairs up. D.B. Cooper insisted that the plane travel slowly, around 200 miles per hour, and never exceed 10,000 feet. The hijacker was aware that these were the minimum speed and altitude at which a 747 could fly without stalling the engine. Because Cooper had a high level of technical expertise and know-how, investigators believed this was a man who had done this sort of thing before. Additionally, he remained calm and collected, never seeming nervous. Because of his demeanor and knowledge, the authorities theorized that he may have been an ex-Army soldier with airborne unit experience, or perhaps even a Special Forces veteran. Once they were in the air, D.B. Cooper told Mccoy to go to the front of the aircraft and close the curtains between first class and coach. She was to stay there for the remainder of the trip. The location where D.B. Cooper may have landed and where the ransom money turned up. When Northwest Orient Flight 305 landed in Reno, the pilots attempted to speak to D.B. Cooper through the public address system to get further instructions. However, there was no response. When they inspected the plane, only Cooper's tie and 2 parachutes remained. Cooper, the money, and the suitcase were gone. It seemed he had lowered the stairs and jumped out of the plane somewhere between Seattle, Washington, and Reno, Nevada. Leads into the case went quietly until 1990. On the Columbia riverbanks in Portland, an 8-year-old named Brian Ingram found about $6,000 in deteriorating $20 bills. The FBI determined that the cash originated from the ransom money given to D.B. Cooper in 1971. The original heist money had never re-entered official American circulation. More than likely, it is nowhere in the country. Even so, with the electronic systems that we have in place today, there was no way of telling whether the money was in another country's circulation or private holdings. It may have also been used in the underground criminal economy. Although hijackings make international headlines today, between 1968 and 1972, it was so common that there was literally one every week. By far, the majority were communists or Latin American criminals attempting to fly to Cuba. However, NORJAK was different. D.B. Cooper was actually one of the first to demand a ransom. The incident set an important precedent for the FBI. To demonstrate to any would-be copycats that this crime would not go unpunished, the agency put a massive effort into solving it. Unfortunately, they never found their man. Then later in the 70s, there was a string of hijackers demanding ransom and diversion to exotic locations such as Algiers and even North Korea. Who was D.B. Cooper? Since November 24th, 1971, the FBI has investigated over 1,000 persons of interest. The assailant appeared to have experience in parachuting, possibly acquired through the military. His technical understanding seemed too developed for a civilian to pull off. Of the original list of over 1,000 people, a limited number of suspects came to light. During the investigation, the FBI made an unrelated but nevertheless startling discovery. A. John Amell, going by the alias Robert P. Clark at the time, was one of the many questioned by the Bureau regarding the Cooper case. During the interrogation, Amell admitted to killing his family in New Jersey some years prior. He thought this was, in fact, why he had been brought in for questioning in the first place. This closed one case, but not the one the FBI had hoped. The FBI thought they had made a break when they received a report from a woman claiming the D.B. Cooper portrait closely resembled her missing husband. Although this seems like a promising lead, the man never turned up. With only the collaborative testimony of the family witness, it went cold. Another lead was a Vietnam War veteran. During questioning, attempted to become the assailant. However, it soon became clear this man was mentally ill and a compulsive liar. Strangely enough, there were a notable number of men coming forward throughout the investigation, claiming that they were the famous hijacker. Two former federal agents, Russell Kalame and Bernie Rhodes, wrote a book called D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy in 1991. They proposed that the Vietnam veteran Richard Mccoy, who hijacked a plane just 4 months after Northwest Orient's Flight 305 incident, was really D.B. Cooper. McCoy had served 2 tours in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot and received multiple awards, including a Purple Heart in 1964. He was also a skilled skydiver. When he hijacked United Flight 355, a Boeing 747 headed from New Jersey to Los Angeles on April 7, 1972, his modus operandi was similar to Cooper's. Calamine and Rhodes indicated in their book that during McCoy's hijacking of Flight 355, his actions reflected some knowledge about the Cooper hijacking that the FBI had never revealed to the public. Therefore, they determined that he must have been D.B. Cooper and that the incident in 1972 wasn't merely a copycat case. Unfortunately, the FBI couldn't prosecute McCoy for the NORJAK case because he had an alibi that placed him in Las Vegas at the time of the incident. Nevertheless, he was caught 2 days after the hijacking of the United flight for $500,000 and skydived out of the back of a plane over Utah. After he was sentenced to 45 years in prison, he escaped in 1974. The FBI found him and shot him dead when he pulled a gun on them. Robert Rackstraw, of all the leads law enforcement may have been most interested in, Robert Rackstraw. Robert was a man who tightly fit the description of D.B. Cooper, a decorated airborne soldier from the Vietnam War. Rackstraw was discharged for a string of offenses that included unauthorized missions and parachute jumps. In 1978, he faked his own death. Then that same year, he was accused of murdering his stepfather, but that was later acquitted of the crime. Behind his questionable record, Robert's face and the sketch of D.B. Cooper showed a 9-point match. The FBI questioned him several times throughout the 70s regarding his involvement in the 1971 hijacking. However, he only sought to stoke the Bureau by offering vague and often contradictory responses. Confident that Robert was the perpetrator, the Bureau compiled a 40-man team to investigate him in the 70s. All they uncovered were instances where Robert presented himself as a Swiss nobleman or some other illustrious character in the interest of swindling someone out of money. Consequently, they concluded he was little more than a traveling grifter. In 2019, Robert Rackstraw died of heart disease. FBI Special Agent Larry Carr, who led the NORJAK case from 2007 to 2010, believed Cooper probably did not survive the jump from the plane. Carr mentioned that parachuting into the rainy night with poor visibility would have been extremely dangerous. For starters, D.B. Cooper would have encountered 200-mile-per-hour headwinds upon jumping. With only loafers and a trench coat, he was not wearing the appropriate gear for the conditions. Additionally, the reserve chute he used was a training chute, thus it was sewn shut. He may have perished in the mountains that night. During Agent Carr's investigation, he scoured the D.B. Cooper forums and found an interesting bit of information. At the time of the hijacking, a French-Belgian comic book called Dan Cooper was popular in Europe. In the fictional stories, the main character, Dan Cooper, was a Canadian Royal Air Force test pilot who had a variety of ventures in planes and space-traveling rocket ships. Carr speculated that the hijacker had been exposed to the comics at some point and may have adopted the protagonist's identity. This bolstered Carr's theory that Flight 305's hijacker had been in the Air Force and was perhaps stationed in Europe. Although countless tips poured into the agency, nothing conclusive came of them. In 2016, the FBI directed its resource to other investigations. However, they will still accept significant evidence as Cooper's parachute and more ransom money if either turns up somewhere. In popular culture, the D.B. Cooper hijacking of Northwest Orient Flight 305 made a mark on American culture in a big way. Beyond the documentaries based directly on the event itself, several recent mainstream television programs reference the famous hijacker, including Prison Break and Blacklist. Interestingly, in the original concept script for Mad Men, there was talk about revealing Don Draper as being D.B. Cooper. This could have blended well into his murky backstory. The nature of the crime, it was essentially victimless. All first-hand accounts paint D.B. Cooper as a gentleman. He went so far as to make sure the attendants were calm and comfortable throughout the flight. Even the money he stole would have been covered by the airline's insurance. D.B. Cooper's stoic demeanor and flamboyant escape have made him a cult hero. There is even a D.B. Cooper Day in the Pacific Northwest at some bars and restaurants. Held on the same day of November every year, people from all around the country come together to swap theories and dress as the man himself. Specifically, men have the initials DBC hold a notable place amongst the crowd. Okay, so that's our story of D.B. Cooper. Still part of American popular culture today. Many books have been written about this skyjacking. He has become a local hero. And there are many other stories connected to this in terms of who D.B. Cooper really was. Another one not mentioned here was that he, after the flight, somebody's daughter finds a letter in the attic and she thinks it might have been him. He eventually becomes a priest. He eventually helps law enforcement solve other crimes. So there are many other people on the list of who D.B. Cooper might have been. So it's a great story, and if you're looking for a research project to do, D.B. Cooper might be one of your best bets, especially if you like military kinds of mysteries. Okay, that's it, and we'll go on to our next slide from here. Okay, so from our previous slide, the D.B. Cooper case, there is a video that connects to that story as well. So our two cases before were criminal, but this case is a non-crime story. It's about a military disappearance, and it talks about something called the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle is an area of ocean off the coast of Florida where, for some reason, there have been many shipwrecks, ship sinkings, ship disappearances, ships found without a crew, lost airplanes, flights, all of that sort of thing, and for hundreds of years. So it's a very unique place off the coast of Florida in a triangle from Florida to Cuba to Bermuda. So within that triangle, there's a lot of strange things going on. Okay, so this is called a mystery Flight 19, and this is from an article, Flight 19 Disappearance, the Most Likely Cause, by Jim R. from historicmysteries.com. So Flight 19 was a group of aircraft that mysteriously went missing off the coast of Florida in 1945. On December 5th, shortly after 2 in the afternoon, 5 General Motors TBF Avenger torpedo bombers and all 14 men aboard disappeared during a training mission over the Atlantic Ocean. Their unexplained vanishing and proximity to the fabled Bermuda Triangle has led to multiple theories as to their ultimate fate. A few Grumman TBF-1 Avengers, from escorting Scout Squadron 29, based out of Norfolk, Virginia in 1942. Okay, so Flight 19 mission. World War II was the first war that involved extensive air combat. Thousands of new planes had to be built, and thousands of pilots needed the training to fly them. Flying heavier than air aircraft was an inherently dangerous activity. Future generations of combat pilots would learn from the first generation's sacrifices. Fatal accidents were common. Pilots were nearly as likely to die in training as they were in combat. In Britain, many died in training. In America, as well. Any combination of mechanical failure, bad weather, and human error could doom any pilot, no matter how experienced. When the mission started on the afternoon of December 5th, 1945, about 7 months after the war ended, it was supposed to be a routine training exercise, but in reality, there was no such thing. The plan was to take off from Fort Lauderdale in Florida and fly in a triangular pattern. It was supposed to be a practice navigation exercise and bombing run. They would start by flying east, drop their bombs at the Hen and Chicken Shoals, and continue for a total of 140 nautical miles. At that point, they would turn left and fly 73 nautical miles north to an area near the Bahamas. Finally, they would turn left and fly another 140 miles back to Fort Lauderdale. All the bombers had crews of 3 Navy or Marine pilots, except for one which had 2 crew members. The flight leader was Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, a veteran combat pilot who had flown missions in the Pacific Theater. Nearly every member of the mission had logged over 200 hours of flying experience. All of them understood the risks. From 2:10 p.m. to 3:40 p.m., Flight 19 took off around 2:10 and proceeded to Hen and Chicken Shoals, where they dropped their practice bombs without incident. But then, somewhere over the Atlantic, bad weather, possibly, meteorologists tracked a massive storm traveling from Georgia south to Miami that day, generating hurricane-force winds at 8,000 feet. Flight instructor Lieutenant Robert F. Cox, in another flight in the area, overheard many of Flight 19's final radio transmissions. At some point, the storm deteriorated or disoriented the aircraft, and they became lost. At 3:40, Lieutenant Taylor radioed in a distress call, reporting a malfunctioning compass, and they lost their way. So, one of the things about the Bermuda Triangle is this malfunctioning of compasses. The article goes on to say, "I'm sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down. I don't know how to get to Fort Lauderdale." Lieutenant Taylor was mistaken about being in the Florida Keys. Instead, they were over 200 miles north. Some have speculated that Taylor, who recently transferred to Florida may have been unfamiliar with the geography. At this time, when American pilots flying over the Atlantic became lost, the protocol was to turn their plane west towards the setting sun and fly until they eventually reached land. The problem was Lieutenant Taylor had become so disoriented that he believed he was at the mouth of the Gulf of Mexico. Flying west, Taylor thought would have put them further over the Gulf instead of turning left and flying west back to Fort Lauderdale. Lieutenant Taylor ordered his men to continue flying east, putting them further out over the open ocean. The last known location was 75 miles off the coast of Coca, Florida. 6 p.m. Lieutenant Cox overheard the men arguing with each other about which direction to go. Around 6 p.m., Lieutenant Taylor's men persuaded him to finally turn around and head west. Shortly later, he reversed course and resumed heading east. Investigators later speculated that one of the planes in Flight 19 might have broken off and flown in another direction, but most followed their commander's orders. As the sun began to set, Lieutenant Taylor ordered his men to begin preparing for a water landing. All planes close up tight, Lieutenant Taylor said. We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together. After several minutes of silence, Lieutenant Taylor frantically calls, "We can't tell where we are. Everything is blank. Can't make out anything. We think we may be about 225 miles northwest of base. It looks like we're entering white water. We're completely lost." Search and there was no, that was their final radio transmission. Okay, so in that event, they send out a search and rescue plane. Lieutenant Cox wanted to search for the planes, but he received orders to return to base. Shortly after Lieutenant Taylor's final transmission around 7:30 p.m., NAS Fort Lauderdale scrambled two PBM Mariner flying boat rescue planes to search for the missing bombers. So these are planes that are able to land on the water. A Martin PBM-5 Mariner was used, and it had a reputation of being notoriously accident-prone. Not good. The airmen nicknamed it the flying gas tank for its tendency to explode. Almost immediately, one of the PBM Mariners vanished, along with its 13 crew members. The next day, the U.S. Navy, Coast Guard, and Naval Aviation personnel sent over 300 planes and boats on a search and rescue mission. They scoured an area of around 250,000 square miles, but found no sign of the missing men, not even an oil slick. Including the PBM Mariner crew, 27 men lost their lives. The investigation. A committee investigation followed, and months later, the Navy published a report of its findings. The committee established many of Flight 19's true location versus where Lieutenant Taylor believed them to be. Most likely, Taylor mistook the Bahamas for the Florida Keys, which is much further south. Ironically, the aircraft's actual location was much closer to where it was supposed to be than where Taylor believed. Initial investigators attributed the accident to mechanical failure caused by the malfunctioning compass. Even though Taylor wasn't found at fault, his mother later successfully petitioned the cause to be changed to unknown, since the Navy hadn't recovered any wreckage or bodies. Some alternative theories. The disappearance of Flight 19 was considered a somewhat mysterious tragedy until 1964. Author Vincent Gaddis published an article about the doomed flight in a sci-fi magazine, Argosy. The Bermuda Triangle stretches from Miami to San Juan, Puerto Rico to Bermuda. In the article, Gaddis argued that the plane disappeared in a region with an unusually high number of air and water accidents, the Bermuda Triangle. Even though that region of the ocean is nowhere different than anywhere else globally, the theory inspired generations of conspiracy theorists. Actually, there's another area in the Pacific with that same kind of anomaly. Over the years, people have speculated the disappearance was caused by anything from interference from the Earth's magnetic field to parallel dimensions to alien abductions. The 1977 film Close Encounters of the Third Kind even depicted a flying saucer abducting the planes and crew and teleporting them to the Mexican desert. High speculation. Aficionados have also continued the search for the aircraft. In 1990, John Maher believed he discovered one of the planes on the ocean floor, 390 feet below the surface. A year later, Graham Hawkes claimed to have found all 5 aircraft. Both were mistaken. While they did find World War II area bombers, they were unrelated to the disappearance of Flight 19. And considering how dangerous aviation was during this period, 1940s plane wreckage off Florida's coast isn't surprising. Okay, so far they have never found any of the planes, any of the men, and it is another historic disappearance case for the military. And we have a video connected to this story as well. So we'll move on to our next slide from here. Okay, so I think we're just about out of time for this week. Wanted to kind of wrap things up a little bit. For our mystery music of the week is entitled The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, a song by Gordon Lightfoot. And this is a historic mystery. Nonfiction. And it's the story of a ship, a container ship, that goes missing in the Great Lakes between the United States and Canada. The ship leaves port, and it's at night, and somehow it just seems to disappear off the radar and sinks to the bottom of the Great Lakes, and it's a mystery as to what exactly happened. So take a listen to the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot. The lyrics are very clear. You should be able to just listen and follow it along. We don't really need to post the lyrics. It's pretty straightforward. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about our homework, which is a audio story or a song about a real life story of crime and punishment. And the song is about 18 minutes long, or you can read it as well, up to you. But it's a very funny story about the true crime by one of America's famous singers. His name is Arlo Guthrie. So it's a Thanksgiving tradition in America for radio stations to play this song about his crime and his subsequent punishment. It was made into a movie, and the movie stars all of the people who were involved in the crime. The criminal, Arlo Guthrie, the singer himself, the police officer that arrested him, and the judge that sentenced him, all played in the movie. His crime was probably listed in order of crimes in terms of brutal murder being number one. His crime would have been about 999. He was arrested for the crime of littering. Now, littering is a crime of throwing trash on the ground. So, the story goes, he was in college out in the Midwest, and he came back to New England, to Massachusetts, I think Stockbridge, western part of Massachusetts, to visit some friends. And his friends had bought an old church, and they made that into their home. But it became kind of a hippie hangout for musicians and artists and creative young people. And the wife of the couple that owned the church slash home slash hippie hangout also owned a restaurant. And the name of the restaurant was called Alice's Restaurant. So Arlo goes to visit Alice and her husband and hang out at the church for Thanksgiving celebration. And Alice and her husband had accumulated a lot of trash. So Arlo and another friend had a Volkswagen bus, and they took all the trash, put it into big plastic bags, and filled up the Volkswagen bus with all the trash and took it to the dump. But unfortunately, the dump was closed because it was Thanksgiving Day. So they drove around the countryside. They found a cliff where other people had thrown trash, and they unloaded the Volkswagen wagon with all the trash and threw it over the cliff and drove away. Well, the local police officer, there's probably one police officer in the whole town, it's a small town, sees the trash, goes down to the bottom of the cliff, digs through the trash, and finds a letter with Arlo Guthrie's name on it, and goes to the church where Arlo's hanging out with his friends, and he and his partner get arrested for the crime of littering. Well, they had dogs there and handcuffs and takes him to jail to be photographed and fingerprinted, and usually the police in a small town would just say, go pick up the trash. But no, Officer Obi had to make a big deal about it. And he eventually gets taken to court for his crime. And he's found guilty of littering. A while later, he is required, because America is involved in a war in Vietnam, to go to the local draft board for his induction into the Army. Well, once they find out that he has a criminal record for littering, he was disqualified from military service. So it's kind of a very funny story. So take a listen to that for your homework. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.